this is a slightly scary transition for me because, as David has mentioned, I've had 30 years as a chief, so 30 years as a police officer, and the last 10 as a chief, and I'm now I'm a bit like an insect in a chrysalis. I'm about to change. One of my staff said that I was coming out, and I said that was news to me, but and I believe that means something wholly different. So what I'm going to try and talk about is the context in the UK and the challenges that the police service faces, and then an experiment that has been brewing for a very long time between Larry Sherman and myself, and in the end it almost came down to the point of Larry kind of challenging me to put my own personal effort where my interest lay at a particularly important juncture. But I'm going to try and set it out as somebody approaching an experiment in a rather difficult context, and some of the challenges that I can see ahead in taking this particular experiment forward. First of all, the challenges. My goodness, what a topsy-turvy world we have. We have the first coalition in the UK since 1945. In fact, the first time the Liberals have been in power since the last time we had a depression. Or at least, I think I'm not supposed to say that, because technically we haven't. But for the first time, I still work for the government. But we are in very difficult economic times, and the last time we had this type of configuration with government was the 1930s. The government has just published a paper, Policing in the 21st Century, and for those interested, it is worth looking at the Home Office website and reading the paper. Many US commentators on policing will be slightly surprised to find the democratic model that we're heading for. It is, one might argue, even more directly democratic in some respects than the US model. We are in the process of moving towards, over the next 18 months, a situation where our 43 police forces, who have up to now, over the last 45 years, been governed by a board made up of councillors, but not directly elected to that board, who are elected for other authorities, and magistrates and now independent members sit on the board. We're now moving to a situation where each Chief Constable will have a Policing and Crime Commissioner directly elected for the area of that police force. That is a major transformation for British policing. On top of that, at a stroke, 20 years worth of national performance targets vanished overnight. It was an odd process because most Chief Constables had spent a good deal of the previous decade, including myself, I hasten to add. I think I was the first to break ranks and found myself on the front of the Times criticising them about an hour before the Prime Minister was due to stand up at Prime Minister's question time, as a result of which I got a rather heated phone call and I walked into a lamppost. Genuinely actually walked into a lamppost, because when the phone goes and the voice on the other end says it's number 10 and you're trying to pay attention to an article in the Times, then lampposts are the least of your worries. No national performance targets is quite a shock for chiefs who have been used to configuring their entire approach to what matters on the basis of league tables and performance. So they've gone, vanished. We also had the really quite astonishing sight of a Conservative Justice Secretary suddenly pronouncing that prison didn't work. And that, given that the previous Home Secretary at that stage in the last Conservative administration had very boldly said that prison did work, this was a considerable change of emphasis. And of course, it doesn't just work, not work, it also costs, and it costs a huge amount for the whole of the justice budget. Similarly, a shift towards prevention and reduction from detection being one of the big themes of the last government. So it's been a topsy-turvy period of time. Most of the assumptions that you would have placed dead centre of what you think policing is about have simply vanished and changed. And the other assumption that's dominated the last 40 years is that every year for the last 40 years in the United Kingdom, and I mean every year, even in times when perhaps in the US you might have seen reductions in budget, every year the British Police Service has seen an inflation rise in its budget at least, and in a number of years it's seen a larger one. This year, the forces have had their first in-year cut in a budget for over 40 years. And next year, they're likely to see their first minus figure on the bottom line for over 40 years. That is also another very, very strong indication that the world has completely changed. They're looking at a budget reduction of 2 billion now out of around about 10.5 billion over the next 4 years. Alongside a requirement to preserve the front line, which is going to be an interesting equation. I think, first of all, defining what the front line is going to be difficult, but secondly, actually preserving services. I think this, let's put it like this, the current model of British policing will not survive the financial pressures. It will need to change very dramatically. And the only part of that equation that will stay the same is the force model. And we've certainly got less predictable crime patterns. It's been extremely difficult to work out what's going on. Broadly speaking, most of what we would normally record as crime is still going down. But there are other areas that are moving pretty rapidly. And then the final one is this enormous demand for accountability, not just in terms of directly elected people, but a whole range of things from transparency of budgets to very significant levels of increased accountability on local commanders as well. So, how do you, in the course of that, actually try and transform? Well, first of all, why come up with an experiment like this just at this moment? There are two particular reasons for this, one of which is we desperately need to put less people in prison for both economic reasons, but also because we're putting an awful lot of people, as Dan I think will say in his next piece, we're putting an awful lot of people in prison for very short periods of time, and broadly speaking, they're making them a lot worse, and having very high levels, increasing levels indeed, of reoffending from what is a very expensive treatment. So that's equation number one. Equation number two is we desperately need to change the way that we do the prosecution process, because so much cost in the business and so much wasted activity is embedded in that. And thirdly, we need a different way of measuring success. If you simply measure success on crime reduction and detections, you end up going around a hamster wheel, which consists of continued and increased levels of audit. There are several, therefore, components to what is quite a substantial experiment, the first of which is to develop a crime harm index, and I'll come on to that a little bit more. Secondly, to test that crime harm index in a real experiment, and the real experiment in this case is to look at how the crime harm index might be able to determine better the right people to put into prosecution, the right people to divert, and the right people to simply get out of the system as fast as possible. And then to work out how well that works through a detailed cost-benefit analysis in terms of the comparative costs between the two treatments, and then outcome measures such as as victim satisfaction and the satisfaction of the police officers involved as well. The first part of the piece, I'm pleased to say that I shan't be doing. The prospect of somebody who's with my level of statistical capability at the moment, taking the 10 million records out of the Police National Computer and converting them into crime harm index is an imaginative thought, but quite beyond my capacity. However, the Cambridge Stats Lab are being commissioned to do this piece of work. It is based around the work that Burke and others have done in Philadelphia, which used 60,000 probation records, but this is on a completely different scale. We have over 10 million detailed online criminal records that we can use as the basis of this. Simply on the basis of scale, we should have a very substantial tool if we can do this work carefully. We're intending to do that pretty quickly. There are a number of challenges. First of all, getting access to the PNC. It is helpful that for the time being I actually run it, and I have also created a process, actually a very serious process of making sure that we've got some ethics around research, but this one will certainly qualify in those terms. Then working with, and this is me, working with individual forces to create a triage tool for custody staff using the CHI, and develop an evidence-based matrix so that when you triage, what do you triage to? You triage to a series of approaches that are based around the evidence that we've already developed around what works better. I won't say what works best, because I think that's to claim too much for the research that's out there, but certainly what works better, and certainly the things that don't work. Testing the tool with random allocation to a control sample and a test sample, hopefully at this stage in more than one police force, so that we can get over that very obvious thing that every chief will say, well, you know, that was Surrey, or that was Hampshire, or that was Alexandria, or that was Manassas, or whatever. That, you know, that particular area of the air is different. We need to get over that profession. It's more than just the experimental issue. It's also the professional issue of it needs to be done in two quite different areas, and then measuring the costs and benefits. There are a number of hurdles. Firstly, developing the CHI is no mean feat. Access is probably the easiest part of it. Working with the data will be challenging, but nevertheless that is capable of being done, and we've succeeded in getting funding to do that. Negotiating with chiefs at the time when there's cuts. Sorry, you want me to do what? And I've got X number of pounds. So this is going to be quite a challenging debate. However, I have got 10 colleagues who've expressed a very serious interest in doing this because they believe it's the right thing to do. Developing the matrix will not be straightforward, and in particular negotiating it with the Crown Prosecution Service will not be straightforward. And actually the last one is probably going to be the most difficult of the lot, because some of the costs data available in prisons and courts are pretty ropey, to be frank. It's a technical term. There are huge opportunities. Ministers are desperately trying to find a better way of measuring value-added policing, so they are very attracted. I've already had conversations with the Police and Justice Minister around this. Chiefs are equally concerned, and that's why the 10 chiefs are so interested in the prospect of being able to measure their performance in a different way, and being able to look at crime harm rather than simply look at number of crimes, which they've found a very difficult and unrelenting approach, which doesn't really measure what matters most. The cuts are so deep that we actually need to make a change to the business model, so this is an opportunity that's worth taking, and at the same time the government has returned over 100,000 prosecution decisions to the police from the Crown Prosecution Service, most of the ones that will be centre of this debate, and that starts in November. So again, we have a real window of opportunity. The police are receiving back a load of information. Actually, it's an opportunity to do things differently. And there is a very urgent need to reduce prison costs, because the Justice Department needs to cut $2 billion out of their budget as well. Next steps, the Crime Harm Index work Larry and I are about to kick off. I'm seeing ministers next week. I've virtually agreed the sites, but I've still got the final yes from 2 chiefs to come. And the last one is probably the most significant one, which is the actual transformation of me becoming a student again, and my daughter thinks it's hilarious. And that's my experiment. Thank you.